Hey Techno Studs, when you're working with Packet Tracer and you're networking different machines, most of the time you're going to want to connect with a straight through cable. But as I mentioned, occasionally you may need to connect with a crossover cable. So in this video, let's talk about a crossover cable and what that looks like and when you might want to use it. Let's just look at an example of where we might use a crossover cable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the end devices here and bring out a couple PCs onto here, and we're going to interconnect these using our standard straight through copper cable. So I'm going to select that and we're going to go from fast Ethernet to fast Ethernet. And as you can see, it immediately says that these are down. It has the down arrow and it's red. So that is not going to work for us. But if I were to use a copper cable to connect both of those, now we see that it is up. So this is an example where we would use a crossover cable. So let's look at why that's the case. Here's a typical local area network. We would have a router on the outside with a switch and all of our end devices connecting into the switch. There's a cable that interconnects these different devices. We call it Ethernet. Ethernet has 8 different conductors to it. However, we only use 4 of those, and they're coupled into pairs. And so here we see a transmit positive and negative pair and a receive positive and negative. And it uses pins 1, 2, 3, and 6 are the ones that Ethernet uses. So we see the transmit and the receive. Now the problem is that if we were to just connect this into another computer, as you can see, this transmit is connecting and this receive is connecting. It's kind of like an ear listening to an ear and a mouth talking to a mouth. That's what is happening here. And what we want is an ear that's listening to a mouth and a mouth that's talking to an ear. That's what we want across here. A switch is set up differently. A switch is set up to communicate to computers. So what computers are is we call that an MDI type connection versus a switch is set up with an MDIX. We've got the mouthpiece of the computer that's talking to the ear of the receive end of the switch. And then the talking piece of the switch is then connected to the receive or the ear of the computer. And now there are one's talking and the other one's listening on one line, and the other one's listening and the other one's talking on the other line. So it all works out. Now we have a communication that's happening because we have this MDI versus MDIX setup on each of the sides. So this is where we would use a straight through cable as one where MDI is talking to an MDIX and communication is going to happen. So the cases that we need a crossover is when there's a device on the network that has this MDI type connection talking to another device that has this MDI connection. And so in this case right here, or it could be an MDIX talking to an MDIX. The point being is that both devices can't be listening on the same connection and they can't be talking on the same connection. And what this crossover cable does is it does exactly what it says it does. It crosses over. These transmit pairs go to the receive pairs, and the transmit over here goes to these receive pairs. And so now that communication is happening successfully. So then the question is when do we use these crossover cables? And we're going to fill out this little chart of what's connecting to what and when we would use that. During this process, just remember that switches tend to be MDIX because they're used to connecting to all of the end devices, which are all MDIs. But we also have this router here, and it usually connects into a switch. So in that case, this router is an MDI as well. So what we have is when a switch connects us to a PC, or in the case like this, or it connects to a router, then we just use a straight through cable. This means if a PC connects to a PC, or a switch connects to a switch, or a router connects to a router, then that's when we're going to use a crossover cable. You may find that this is not always true, that you can connect a switch to a switch. And perhaps that's because an auto MDIX is set up. An auto MDIX is when the switch is set up to auto sense what's on the other side and adjust accordingly. So in this case right here, if you have a switch, 2 switches that are auto MDIX, and they're connecting to these other devices, it doesn't matter which one, it just is whatever. You can use a crossover, you can use a straight through. Looking at this chart, it might give the impression that if your switches are using auto MDIX, then maybe you just should use all crossover cables, which is not advisable. In fact, if you're using auto MDIX, you actually want to use even more straight through cables, because switch to switch connections can use these straight through cables as well. So why would we want to use all straight through? And the reason is because the majority of your connections really are going to be straight through cables. You're really not going to use crossover cables very much at all. It's going to be pretty rare that you would use those. Number two, it makes troubleshooting a little more complicated, because when you get crossover cables, when you get too many crossover cables, like let's say you're using patch panels and stuff and you end up two crossover cables connected together, it makes another straight through cable. So that can cause problems. So it really is, most of the time you want to use those straight through cables unless you have to use one of those crossover cables.